Ghost Frequency. That's
Cool.
the name of our project. Tell us about Techne a little more and what you do as an artist. A little bit of background might be nice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Techne is an arts organization, arts education organization
Mhm.
with a mission to have more divergent voices
Mm-hmm.
participating and represented in music and technology. And we try to build a bigger representation through workshops that allow people hands-on experience with
Mhm.
various technologies and with emerging practices in music and experimental practices in music that they may not typically encounter.
Right.
Techne is a little bit less about that relationship between a musician with their instrument as a practitioner and more about a demystification of technology and audio technology in general for that age group. So some of them might have electronic instruments,
Mhm.
definitely, but we're not teaching them to build or to understand their own instrument. We're actually trying to open up the door to say, well, there's
Right.
all of these other kinds of instrumentations.
Mhm.
Electronic music is one of them. And guess what? It's not as confusing or mysterious or
Yeah.
difficult as you think it is.
Yeah,
It's actually
it's true.
pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and I'd say that we are using electronic music as a vehicle to discuss basic ideas that are common to most of technology, right? So it's really just one aspect of how technology is applied, but once one starts to understand the building blocks within the technologies behind electronic music, one also understands the building blocks behind the technologies behind almost anything, right? So once you get these principles down, you can take them anywhere.
Right.
One big project that we do is what we call electronic music powered by girls, which is a contact microphone building workshop. Typically, we're working with middle school, high school aged kids, and we have a really great collaboration with girls rock camps, a lot of them, so all over the West Coast, all over the East Coast, South. We've gone to, 30 or so girls rock camps over the last 5 years. And so we are doing like a very straightforward 3-hour workshop of build a contact microphone, solder, learn about signal flow.
Do they all
They all solder.
They all do it.
That's amazing.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, they
No
might
one's
be a little
ever
bit-
dropped out.
They
No
might be a
one's
little bit nervous.
Yeah,
They
sure.
always do it.
There's always someone with
Yep.
a little bit of anxiety,
Yeah.
but they've all
Yeah.
overcome that anxiety in some form or fashion. So.
Yeah.
Do you eventually after let them play with objects and
Yep.
like?
Yeah,
Oh, wow,
so
cool.
we build the mic first. We do like this kind of 3-part workshop.
Uh-huh.
It's more like almost like a 4-part workshop.
Yeah.
Build the mic, do the signal flow, do the technology part, and then as we've been kind of emphasizing to the folks here at Mills,
Yeah.
the product is actually the least important part. It's actually the process, the
Yeah.
exploration of the instrument, the bringing it out in the world.
Mhm.
So after they make the product, like the actual mic, then we make a sort of more idiosyncratic instrument, a box. They have a box, they tape the microphone to the box, then they start to decorate the box. They make an actual instrument.
Yeah.
And then after that, we're in exploration zone. We just have like a table full of toys, and we say, you have your instrument, you have this big table of stuff, go start making sounds. And they're making sounds. And then at the very end, we get into what is this like listening space, improvisation space. So we'll do like a short listening exercise.
So what makes it important to listen? And I think I feel like you have a lot to comment about that
So
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that as a culture we
Uh-huh.
are underskilled in listening. First of all, because we tend to be, and I'm talking about most contemporary societies, right, that are, have incorporated a certain type of media and culture, we tend to be focused on the visual, right? And that is a product of stemming from the time of the printed word, when we started to think in linear narrative, right? And started to prescribe linear narrative, and slowly we've been building on that visual context, right? And starting to disassociate from the oral engagement with the world, right? So on a base level, I would like to inspire people to get reconnected in a conscious way, right? I don't think that we've, completely disconnected from it, but consciously, I think that we're not aware of all of the sensorial interactions that we're having with the oral environment, right?
Yeah.
And when we start to interact, when we start to focus more on the sonic environment and our interaction with that environment, it triggers a presence that is unusual to our normal way of being. And I think that it also awakens us to so much more of what's going on in our environment. And just on a principle level, I think that awakening is really necessary in our culture right now, because of how narrowly focused we are in, say, a particular singular object visually, and are very attached to that linear narrative, and have tended to, forgive the pun, but tunnel vision, right?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's what we've seem to be adopting and it's my belief that if we can open up our sensorial experience, right, to include the multiple of interactions that we're having with our environment, then all of a sudden the environment takes much more precedence in our life, and what's going on in those moments, in the exchanges, whether it be between us, whether it be between me and the objects around me, the animals around me, the trees around me. There's so much that's available there. So listening in particular is a pathway into that flow.
Right. You are always expected to produce.
Right.
Produce, not receptive, nothing, like always putting something out there.
Right.
And this idea of taking something in, like really, like focusing on listening.
Right.
It's really important exercise for us, especially because we don't get to do that much in such fast-driven society.
Yeah, and I'd like to say also just one more thing to follow up on that. And you point out a very powerful dynamic that's and even as people that are being encouraged to put ourselves out in the world in terms of advocating for marginalized communities, right? We're like, they must have a voice, right? We must, make our voices known, right? So it's all about projection, right? So we tend to discount the empowerment that comes with listening, the empowerment that comes with actually
Seeing all things connect,
Yeah.
or in a way that,
as Mint was pointing out,
Yeah.
the empowerment that comes with being on the other side of that equation.
I see.
Absorbing
Of absorbing instead of projecting.
Though technically capitalism wants you to consume as much as it wants you to
Yeah.
produce.
Yes,
But I would
exactly.
say that the practice of listening is
Yeah.
a little bit of more of a neutrality, because for my own, the way that the kind of my listening skills, as it were, developed through improvisation was mostly because I was always doing improvised music in a group setting. So already, just by virtue of the ensemble, excuse me, you kind of have to start opening your ears. Right? You're playing with 2 or 3 people.
Right.
You're
Different instruments as well.
Yeah, different instruments. You're really trying to kind of connect as a group through the improvisation, which I'm sure being at Mills
Yes.
you've done plenty of.
Yes.
So your ears start to open up, and you're starting to listen in some way that is both about what am I going to do next, but it's also about like what is the neutrality of this kind of listening, like how open and how aware or mindful even would be the word, of this situation can I be? Can I hear all the instruments? Can I think about what they're doing? Can I imagine where they might go next? So in a way it's an absorption, but it's not, maybe listening for me in that, the way that I experience it in improvisation is not even about an absorption towards me, it's just more about like neutral space, which is actually the more idealistic idea of listening and improvisation, which is that it's anti-capitalism. It's not about producing or consuming. It's actually about this kind of like resistant space, like this kind of resistant space. So listening as kind of, well, so that kind of listening in the music space is kind of a radical gesture, and that's coming from, all the years of, where all the history of using improvisation as a kind of a resistance, and that would be in Indian classical music, that would be in European like AMM stuff. That's coming from a long history of what it means to hang in the present.
This idea of using the stillness as sort of a medium of resistance is, I think, very interesting concept.
And hanging in the present. Hanging in the present, releasing yourself from history in a certain way. And this idea of making music in the present moment. This is coming from Cage. This is coming from that particular history of electronic music, and that particular post-World War II type of like thinking, which was both this kind of like, oh my God, the past. We have to release ourselves from the past. The past is just so fucked up. And that's the past, the political past, but that's also the musical past. It's just like a prison. So over time, that moment of resistance, as it was identified by this particular group of artists, I think has to be a little bit shifted when it comes to folks of color and marginalized communities. Like being in the present is restorative, but we are not having the luxury of forgetting our past. So I think that's an important distinction, right? It's like, yes, this kind of avant-garde stance, this of resistance, being in the present, fuck history, we're moving into the future, post-World War II. That's glorious and great, but as it's modified for like contemporary times, especially for any marginalized voice, my stance is the present is restorative, like working in that way, those methodologies are restorative, but I will not for an instant let anyone say that I should forget my past.
And I think that the space of listening allows for the nomadic movement between memory and present, right? So
because we're constantly jumping back and forth.
Right, there is a modulation that is always happening, right?
On the personal level, but I'm talking about on the political level. There's a real factual past that should never be erased in context with certain artists. I mean, I believe that for myself.
Some people don't start with nothing, is what you mean.
They don't have the luxury.
No one starts from nothing.
They don't have the luxury to say that their past is something that is just removed from them, or it could even be removed from them, like the factual past, like the history of Black people in America, the history of Asians in America, the history of women in America. It's like those actually they should never be removed. Like, you're not just a free agent. We are women. We are people of color. We don't get that luxury to be like sort of neutral in that way. We're not the standard bearers. So that's why I think like it's good to remind myself. Listening systems.
Applies listening practice into improvisation and like more or less the social implications.
So I think I was starting to talk about
Your two practices.
my two practices, which really exist on a spectrum. I think of them as one practice. Just one is performed in real time with a different set of tools, and the other has arranged elements, pre-arranged elements, and though they both exist with elements of improvisation. And first I should say that my entry point into listening is through the practice of Pauline Oliveros's deep listening methods. So, and I have to say that when I started studying with her, it changed my both improvisation, my composition practice, my playing practice, my every aspect of how I engage with my creativity, also has informs other life aspects. but the difference that I could see with my creativity has been palpable in terms of strengthening the muscle of listening, right, and recognizing how much is happening in any given moment, and where I can participate, right, or be able to be aware of the moments where being quiet is as powerful of a choice. So I think that actually having a practice, meaning exercising with listening as much as you would exercise to go running or exercise to, or practice a language, has been an activity that I have incorporated into my practice, and it shows up via improvisation, much like a muscle, much like muscle memory, if I was practicing my scales, if I was practicing any other technique. So it shows up there, and then it shows up in my composition practice. And the way that it shows up there is I will, because most of my composition practice is in site-oriented installation. So I will spend up to a week in the space listening to the space in various ways. I can listen electronically, meaning placing mics around to see what's happening. I will listen somatically, right, to get a sense of how my body is interacting with the materials in the space. Listen to whatever historical narrative is about the space. That means actually talking to people, getting a little bit of history about the space, what's been happening here. So there are all these levels within that context that I apply my listening practice. So, I was going off on another tangent. I don't know, I'm going on this other tangent now. Yeah. So.
And is that how you see every space when you arrive in it? Do you become aware of the entire space?
I think I have a heightened consciousness of it that has developed over time.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I appreciate the amount of time it takes me to actually get oriented now, and I give myself the time to do that if I can, if I have that luxury. Like today, I just went around and took a walk around, the campus to remind myself that wow, there's all of this interaction and development that has happened here, and wanted to be more cognizant of that.
What about you?
I think that's an interesting question. I think I would say I'm trying to I didn't have the benefit or the chance to work with Pauline. If I take it on a broad term, the practice of listening, I mean, it might be kind of strange to say, but there is something to be said for the visibility and visibility of folks of color in this country, which allows you sometimes a strangely privileged position of receding into a space, especially for folks of color who are not Black in this country. We recede in an unusual way that I remember experiencing when I was a kid. I was either the brightest thing in the room, and people were like, "What is this strange child?" Or I was completely invisible. I wasn't they didn't even think I was there.
Yeah,
right?
it's
So
really
you guys
polarized.
I mean, that's what we experienced. And it happens really when we're young and we know what it feels like to be this is so weird. I'm either oh my God, everybody stop looking at me, or I could shit my pants and nobody would notice, right? So there's something about that. There's something strangely empowering about being able to recede like that, and that is probably the earliest kind of relationship around listening, like a hyper-awareness of your surroundings, right?
Right.
Because you're negotiating that visibility and invisibility. The hyper-awareness of your surroundings creates an acuteness of paying attention. And so when I started improvising and getting into that, and that was really the music that I'm making now was largely because I started to get into improvising. So I didn't have a classical training before, and I wasn't I hadn't like formed that particular way of approaching music.
Yeah.
So I did have a little training, but not much. But so I was kind of lucky that my introduction to the kind of work that I'm making now was largely through an improvisational practice. So as soon as I was in that environment, I noticed that visibility, that recession, being able to recede, and then being able to be really like forefronted and present in a very intense way, started to become a really useful way for me to kind of even osmotically get from actual improvisation the things that Pauline talks about. So I remember when I finally did get into understanding what she was doing in her practice, describing the way she was talking about the practice and looking at her scores, I was like, yeah, I've thought about that. Like I've thought about the negotiation of the space that way because of, and I think it's just, I mean, in my weird utopian fantasy of like, the rise of female musicians and folks of color, I think folks of color are particularly well suited for a practice of listening because of this receding and this projection negotiation, and I think we're particularly well suited for the fluidity that improvisation and certain kinds of practices, like kind of emerging practices, require. I kind of always believed that, and it wasn't just sort of self-serving. I kind of noticed it in other people. Like there's a commonality of root experience.
Yeah, it puts
that
you
translates,
in a certain perspective.
So in the practice of improvisation, I think I just felt like it was totally at home for me. Like when I started playing that kind of music, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. I know what it means to be both hyper vigilant and aware of multiple layers of activity and potential threat maybe happening. We know what it's like to be hypervigilant, but at the same time, we also know what it's like to kind of move through that space and negotiate that space. It's like a skill that a lot of us have from when we were kids, just based on, things that shouldn't matter.
Just to kind of wrap up, I guess. I guess. Wait, what would be next step for you from? With Techne or in your practice or whatever?
I mean, I'd say insofar as Techne, first of all, I don't believe that there's any singular answer to any of these questions. I think that what Bonnie and I have identified is a deficit, and we have created a program that we think addresses that particular deficit, right? So I think what we hope is happening is that the people that go through our workshops and experience this, take the experience with them out into the world, and that's one little piece that will contribute to the many events that can start to
unravel.
Well, that can start to bring us to the society that we envision, right? The utopian idealistic spaces. That I mean, it is what it is. Those words or those phrases. I don't necessarily. I think that every space, actually, even the moment that we're in right now, right? It is what it's supposed to be, right? I do firmly believe that.
So for Techne, it's you guys are going to continue workshopping with more kids as possible.
We'll continue workshopping for the organization to grow. We need more people to participate, so we're creating methods for people to do that. So that's our next step.
Building a network of practitioners and like-minded folks who will help run workshops, help go into different organizations that we've identified, these girls rock camps that we're talking about, and maybe run a contact mic workshop or maybe do a different kind of workshop there.
Yeah.
So we want to rhizomatically branch out because we're just two people and we can only do so much.
And also the more people that
have 4 hands,
4 the more people that are involved. The stronger the organization gets, to be honest, the more diverse voices.
That mystic quality of electronic music that really can be fought off.